Good afternoon, everyone. It's Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research Curator Kevin Adkisson here with another Live at 5. And today I am at Brookside, and we are going to be talking about the Logjam Arch and the Pickle Hut. And I thought that I would get started here looking at the main Brookside meeting house just because these are kind of amazing icicles that are hanging off of the original Cranbrook Educational Building, the meeting house by George Booth, with additions from the 1920s and the 1930s, and the wonderful Mother Goose barge boards carved by what is his name? Joachim Youngworth. And partly we're starting over here because the snow slowed my walk down. And so this is as far as I got from Sarnen House to Brookside before 5 o'clock. But I want us to not only enjoy the icicles, but also the sort of charm that was created with Brookside by building all of these buildings over time. And so the 1930s saw the addition of the Brookside Tower and the original gymnasium, all designed by Henry Booth. And so Brookside is the only part of the campus without Sarnen buildings. And those of you who have followed along with Live at 5 long enough know that I have done tours before of Brookside and the Early Childhood Center. And so the ECC was the first of the so-called Cranbrook Millennium Projects. That's the building straight ahead. And they were a series of constructions executed under the leadership of Cranbrook President Dr. Lillian Bowder, who hired a unique group of talented young architects to come and expand the campus with new and very necessary buildings. So this Millennium Project opened in 1996. It is the Vlasic Early Childhood Center, designed by the Canadian architect Peter Rose, who was practicing in Cambridge at the time. And as part of all of the Millennium projects, the architects and Cranbrook wanted the buildings to have that same sense of handmade quality that the earlier architecture did. And so what that meant was the establishment of the Architectural Advisory Council, as well as different art councils and advisors. And some of it involved the moving of sculptures from Cranbrook Art Museum into permanent locations. So inside the ECC, if you scroll all the way back to May, I think I did the tour, in the inside, you'll see that there are sculptures by Carl Millis and other Cranbrook artists inside the building. But then there also needed to be little Cranbrook moments outside of the building as well. And so for the architect, Peter Rose, who, if you've been enjoying our History of American Architecture class, Peter Rose is another one of these great sort of construction-minded architects who really sees architecture getting its meaning not from sign and symbol, not so much from architectural ornament, but from construction detailing. And so we've come to our first topic of today's Live at 5, the Logjam Arch. But before I get to it and the story of its construction, I just want to point out a few of the details that Peter Rose, the architect, incorporated onto the building. And so one of that is the use of custom concrete block that have Brookside student handprints on them. And so when we look at the building, you'll see that these might be faculty or very large children. And so there are little brass tacks, T3, that would tell us which of the Brookside student or faculty is actually built into the building. instead of using the steel beam and then covering it up with some sort of finish, he leaves it exposed, and it gets the sort of architectural excitement through the use of the construction element without adding any sort of cover or without adding any... Okay, sorry about that. We were trying to connect to the inside internet, so we're now running off cell service, and hopefully we won't have that problem again. Now, another thing that Peter Rose does is he solves certain problems of building construction, like how does a concrete block actually meet the edge? And so instead of cutting the concrete blocks, he does these interesting little brick coins, is what you would call them, Quoins. And so in a traditional sort of construction, the coins would usually actually be the stone, and then the plaster would be inside of the coin. But here he does this rather Saarinen-esque detail where all the concrete blocks are left full, and then any time that you would need a half or a quarter of a concrete block, he adds in the brick infill. There's lots of little detailings that I think make this building feel really tactile. And when you're on the inside, it's also a very what an architectural critic might call a thin building. So there's no sort of ceiling lasagna. That is not what a critic would call it. That's what I call it. That is the sort of idea that the distance between the ceiling you see and the roof outside becomes thick with layers and layers of building products. Peter Rose tried to get rid of all unnecessary anything, and so the building is really expressing its structure. Which is why I think the Logjam Arch is then such an interesting architectural installation to put alongside of Peter Rose's building, because this structure was designed by Dan Hoffman and the architecture students of the Academy of Art. And Dan Hoffman was here from 1986 until 1996. This was installed in 1997, a year after he had moved to the University of Phoenix. And this piece, it is meant to sort of evoke, and this is my own reading of it, evoke this sort of thrill of, the sort of wondrous thrill of logs floating overhead, and some of them seemingly unattached to anything. And it makes me think of a bird's nest and the way that sort of bird nest architecture is connected directly to how the bird actually assembles its nest. And so all of the logs are simply placed here, and then they're held in suspension on cables. And so you see the way that the logs have these metal sort of hook and eye systems, and then you see the secondary system of steel cables that are holding it in tension. So the entire piece is suspended where the logs of the Logjam Arch are the sort of horizontal force, and then the steel cables and wires are providing the counterbalancing force. And so it all sort of clips together, and it allows the logs to float seemingly unsupported above us. If you ever had to take a structures class or engineering class, if you were drawing this, you would end up drawing all the arrows going down, showing that this force is going this way and this force is going this way. And then together, it's like a very complicated fantasy work of engineering. And it does, I can just imagine if I'm 31 and I enjoy sort of walking through the arch because it is kind of magical, but especially as a kid, it just adds that sort of element of fantasy and whimsy to the entire little construction. And it also solves a problem of how to read that sort of interstitial courtyard between the old Brookside building, the 1950s gymnasium, and the new ECC, because it provides a sort of counterbalance to the main entrance of the building. Now, as a way to try and bring the building in on budget, the students also constructed elements of Peter Rose's design. So this entire entrance canopy is actually the work of the Cranbrook Architectural Office. And the Cranbrook Architectural Office were students and recent alumni of Dan Hoffman's architecture program. And so while Peter Rose designed the building, the students then worked on the design and the actual fabrication of this overhang. So instead of sending it out to contractors and paying a premium on that, the architecture students in a warehouse over on Long Lake Road actually served as the labor to construct this piece. Now, one of the reasons that we came over here today to the ECC was I had a request to tour the Pickle Hut. And so the Pickle Hut is our next destination. We shall traverse over to it. And if you know the name Vlasic, perhaps you know them from the grocery store, and they did make their fortune in pickles. And so the Pickle Hut is a sort of outdoor classroom, wooden fort fantasy over here in the middle of the brook that gives Brookside its name. And so this feature, which here in the winter it actually seems much closer to the building than it does in the summer when all the landscape has grown up around it and it sort of disappears. But there is an island in Brookside here, and I've heard different versions of the story as to why the island exists. It was not always here. It had to be added as part of the flood control measures. And then once there was this island, all of these houses that back up to the Brookside used to be part of the Grace Booth Wallace estate. And Grace Booth Wallace was the middle daughter of George and Ellen Booth, our founders. And so in the earliest years of Brookside, when it was known as the Bloomfield Hills Seminary School, and then the Bloomfield Hills School, and finally Brookside, the school actually used all of the Wallace estate as its playground. And so historically, Brookside students would cross this little brook and play in the fields there. Now, of course, they cross Cranbrook Road and play on fields cut into the George and Ellen Booth property. But on special occasions, the students in their classes or in summer camps or just on their own can wander through the woods and experience the Pickle Hut. And it looks like I am the only one who has been over here since we got 8 inches of snow. So I shall be the one to put footprints in the Pickle Hut. And this is another example of Dan Hoffman's architecture. And Dan Hoffman studied under the significant American architectural theorist and educator John Haydock. Haydock was a Bronx-born architect who really invented sort of a new way of conceiving architecture as a text and as a story. And so Haydock, who served as the dean of the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Art and Science from 1975 till 2000, his architecture was all about sort of architecture as structure expressing stories and unseen desires. And John Haydock didn't actually build a lot of buildings, but he did a lot of poems and he did a lot of buildings that looked like things. And so Dan Hoffman had studied with Haydock, and he really took to heart Haydock's idea that architecture should be clearly constructed. It should express its construction. So you should never sort of hide a steel beam underneath a wall. If you're going to have a beam, it should be a beam. If you're going to have a joint, you should show the joint. And then also the buildings, I think John Haydock gave a whole generation of architects the idea that architecture could be extremely personality driven, that a building could not only have eyes as a windows, but the windows could be literally like 2 windows and looking like an eye. And I say all that, if you saw my history of architecture lecture where we talked about John Haydock and his impact on Cranbrook, which is profound in the 1980s, because I think the Pickle Hut really embodies Haydock's ideas and this whole movement of sort of 1980s and 90s architecture better than any building that really Haydock had built or really any building here at Cranbrook. Because it has this really sort of mysterious, brooding personality, it looks like it could be some sort of ancient temple that we're about to occupy, that it could be some sort of site of First Nations activities, or that the building might just get up on its little legs and start walking away. And I mentioned how much Dan Hoffman admired the poetics of construction. And so when we look at this building with its cedar plank and then its steel brackets and its concrete base, it really is quite easy to figure out how it was put together. And that was very important to Dan Hoffman, that the construction be understandable. And so we have these really beautiful large-headed nails that are driven in, and then the cedar planks are overlapping each other, and they're weathering at different rates and causing all of the sort of visual pleasure of cedar planks as they age and become even more weathered. And then down below, we see the entire hut is resting on these, I'm not sure what the wood is, these wooden columns, which are then held by these custom steel brackets that are bolted. The wood is bolted into the bracket, and then the concrete is holding the steel. And if I clear the snow off of this, you'll see again this sort of celebration of construction, in that you'll notice that the concrete is lined up where the relief joint in the concrete is lined up perfectly with the steel. And so all of this would have been constructed with the architecture students. And so it was essentially a teaching tool for the academy students to provide this really interesting sort of outdoor architectural object for the Brookside students. And then when we step inside, you know, I'm at 6 feet. I'm holding the camera about eye level. And so we're now entering into this wonderful room. But if I was just a few feet, it's almost like I'm in a fort. And so it is like the most wonderful sort of pillow fort you've ever imagined, where then as the meadow and wild grasses that surround the Pickle Hut grow up across the summer and then fade back in the fall and disappear in the winter, you have these sort of different views leading in and out of the hut. And then you have this wooden bench that is running beneath the concrete wall. It is pretty amazing in the snow. And then as we look up, we see this great view and this sort of frame of the sky in much the manner of sort of the Roman Pantheon, where once you are inside the building, if you're a little kid, I think the outdoor view might be the more exciting one. But for me, it's if you have any height to you, it's amazing how suddenly your entire focus becomes looking up to the sky. And so the wooden posts run past the cedar planking, and then they shoot up like sentinels, framing this clear view up above. And this building was completed in 1996, and so it is, how old does that make it? 25 years old this year. And you see that because Dan Hoffman used these natural quality materials, I mean, the whole pavilion is in fabulous shape because these are all materials that work well together through winter, spring, summer, and fall. They are sort of aging gracefully and harmoniously. And also there's no roof to even have a leak. And so the whole thing is I think, becoming even more beautiful. And there are elements that help keep it preserved even longer. And so you'll see this copper banding that is running around. And of course, copper goes on bright orange. And so in the construction pictures of this building, it looks like a penny running around. And it has this very distinct sort of contrast between the bright, pale yellow cedar that's all sort of universally bright, and then this shiny, shiny copper here. And now we see that the cedar is becoming more golden, and it will turn even further gray. And then this copper is already beginning to turn green, like the Statue of Liberty. And so it takes copper between 15 and 30 years to turn green. And so you'll see that it is starting to patinate, to patina here, much in the same way that the Kingswood School roof, which was replaced between 2002 and 2014, is starting to turn green in the 2002 sections. So the shingles weren't taken all the way up. I think to lead our eyes up to the heavens. So I think instead of making it feel like the hut just was missing a roof, I think by running the poles all the way up and past it, it makes it feel more intentional. It leads our eyes, and then it creates this sort of crown between us and the sky above. I have been in here when it was raining, and it is kind of amazing what being in a sort of truncated cone, how it protects you from the weather. And so you can be in here and it will rain, but the rain is usually coming at some sort of angle, so parts of it will be dry, and you can be in this sort of outdoor room, partially protected from the rain. And I think it joins a long history of buildings, of architecture in the landscape as pavilions. And so think of the great English landscape architects of the 18th century, like Constable Brown and other designers, Strawberry Hill, Horace Walpole, and the idea that the garden is beautiful, the landscape is beautiful, but it will be more beautiful if you put a little folly in the landscape. And a folly is simply a building that is usually not a full scale, so it might look like a castle from far away, and then you get closer and it's much smaller. It's something that usually is providing a very loose purpose. So is it a picnic pavilion? Is it there for concerts? Is it there for poetry? Is it there for romantic escapades? And so it's usually sort of non-programmed space. You don't have kitchens in a folly. You don't have heaters in a folly. They're just sort of pavilions in the landscape to go and discover. I think a gazebo would be the most sort of basic form, the least inspiring form of a folly. And so the Pickle Hut is a folly par excellence for the late 20th century, because what it does is it's visible from the car pull around, it's visible from the classrooms, it's sort of mysterious, it doesn't quite have a function, you don't know, should I be over here, can I go in here, is this open, is it closed? And that is what, that sort of layers of mystery are what make it so enchanting. I was a little bit perplexed as to why this past fall they cut all of the trees down around it. It used to be significantly more enclosed by the woods, but it still looks sort of great floating over here. The question about are the Brookside students in school? They are. All of Cranbrook schools are now back in in-person classes with lots of restrictions and different things to try and keep them safe. But the elementary school, the K through 12, pre-K through 12 students have been in since September. There's more just really beautiful construction details to the whole project. So the way that this edge condition is held in, and you'll see wooden pins that are running through and holding this bolt to keep this wooden joint on. So it's built almost like a piece of furniture where it's slipped into the construction. And then another just really elegant detail is the way that this concrete wall, which keeps the whole ring in place, comes to a round ring here. And what this is doing is the concrete is providing essentially all the lateral bracing to keep this piece from exploding. So all of this wood being turned like this, the wood, especially as the seasons change and humidity change, the wood would want to sort of pop off and straighten back out by attaching the wood to the verticals and then the verticals to the concrete. It's going to keep the whole thing from shifting and from popping out of place. It's actually in miraculous condition for being 25 years old. I think it's a testament to Dan Hoffman's ability to detail construction. Another custom detail are these hooks that the same way the concrete ring on the ground is keeping it from popping apart, this giant steel circle is also holding all of the vertical wooden elements in place using a custom little tie there, and then the ring does go all the way around. So I want to thank my sisters roommate, Jess, for suggesting the Pickle Hut after Monday's lecture, where the Pickle Hut got the real short shrift, and I just simply showed a picture of it and said, of course, Cranbrook's Pickle Hut. And Jess, who has never been to Cranbrook, never heard of Cranbrook until she moved in with my sister in New York City and has watched every single Live at 5 for a year. She said, how have we never seen the Pickle Hut? And I realized that with Brookside and the ECC being some of the least toured spots on Live at 5, we had never gotten over here. So if anyone else has other questions, type them in. If you have other requests of where we should head to next, I'm always open to suggestions. Of course, down the way, that is the backyard of Thornley House, which we've toured before. And then again, from the other side of the brook, which splits in half, here we see the Pickle Hut again. And this is the waterway that's running from sort of all the way from the Orpheus Fountain down through the woods, through Kingswood Lake, out behind the Kingswood dormitories, under Cranbrook Road, and then it shoots all the way down to the River Rouge and passes Henry Ford and the F-150s, and then on to the Great Lakes. And the reason it is called Brookside is because the brook is running behind the entire building. And here we see the ECC, the Early Childhood Center, with all of the classrooms for the students. If you're interested in learning more about the ECC, I did do a Live at 5 tour through it, as well as a YouTube tour and a lecture on this building last year. So there's always more to learn about Cranbrook than what we can get into here on Live at 5. That snow was officially deeper than my bean boots, so I am going to turn around and trek back across campus to my house, and I will be back next week for another Live at 5 on Wednesday and a Live at 5 on Tuesday on Instagram. You can see all of the Live at 5s if you go onto the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research Facebook page, which you are presumably on, and then hit on the video tab, and you can scroll through, and all of the Live at 5s should be listed back to my very first one in March of 2020, a tour of the sculptures at the Art Museum, back when I thought we might be together for a few months. And here we are, continuing on to ever more beautiful and esoteric corners of the Cranbrook campus. Thanks so much for joining me for another Live at 5. And if you did not receive the email, that means if you don't get Cranbrook emails, it means you're not on our email list. So head over to center@cranbrook.edu, scroll all the way down, and there's a enter your email subscribe button. That means that you are going to start getting the emails about special lectures and events that we're doing, including one on March 14th with the executive director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Historic Artist Homes and Studios organization. She'll be telling us about the rarefied group of 48 houses across the country that are National Trust sites and historic artist homes. Just last Wednesday, Saarinen House was announced as the newest member of the Historic Artist Homes and Studios Coalition. And I wrote the application. It was a lot of work. And we were admitted for the work of Mrs. Saarinen, of Loya Saarinen, as a weaver and textile designer, because it is not an organization of architects' homes. So make sure that you sign up for that upcoming program on March 14th. And then if you sign up for our emails, you'll know all about what is happening at the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, including an exhibition that I'm curating that will open on March 28th, virtually, with all of the art students working in our historic houses. So there's lots of exciting things coming up here in the next few months from Cranbrook and the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. As always, Live at 5 is a free program. And we hope that you enjoy it. We hope that you're able to support the center if you are able, either through donations or through coming to some of our paid programs. You can always find out more information at center.cranbrook.edu. I'm Kevin Adkisson, and until next time, be safe, be warm. I'm gonna go kick all this snow out of my boot. Goodbye, everyone. I'll leave you with some gratuitously beautiful snow footage of the Cranbrook campus as we head home to the other side. I will not be like that ice skater in Amsterdam who fell into the canal. I will not go and trust that body of water. Goodbye, everyone.